Greetings and welcome to Let's Talk About Books, baby, where we talk with your favorite LGBTQ plus authors. I'm Anita Kelly, and my guest today is Rachel Kramer Bussel. Hi, Rachel.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for being on the show. I appreciate it. It's good to talk to you. And I wanted to jump right in and talk about your newest book called The Lap Dance Lust, a collection of erotic stories. That was a mouthful, but just the name, the title in and of itself conjures up all kinds of images. So what is this book about? Can you tell us?
Well, it's short stories, so they don't individually they don't take that long to read. They're covering about the last 20 years, which is how long I've been writing erotica. And Lap Dance Lust is the title of the first story, which was also one of the first erotica stories I ever wrote. And the stories really range from kind of humorous to some are more intense. There's some BDSM, there's role playing, there's fantasies, there's fetishes, there's bisexual stories, lesbian stories, heterosexual stories. Like there's a range. But Lap Dance Lust, that story was inspired by a real lap dance that I got my first time at a strip club a very long time ago. So long, I don't even know exactly when. But it was very exciting for me. And at the time, I was just starting to write erotica, and I was always, I wouldn't say I was looking for things to write about, but my life inspired a lot of my writing. So that story is, I would say I think 100% a true story. Most of mine that are based on my life, I've altered some things, but that one pretty much is what happened. And okay, yeah, go on. I could tell you more about some of the others. It's funny because when I was putting this together, I don't know exactly how many erotica stories I've written, but a lot, like many dozen. And so I didn't have room for all of them. So I had to really think about which ones were important to me personally, which ones I thought readers would like, and which ones went well together, but also offered that range of types of sexuality, types of experiences and characters, because some of these characters are maybe more innocent than others, and some are more, I don't know, dirty, if you want to call it that. There are some that are semi-autobiographical or autobiographical, and some that are totally made up, which, I'm not going to give a rundown of each one, but, there's some that I had to do either research for or just look into certain things. There's a trans boxing story, which was originally published in a book called Take Me There, of trans and genderqueer erotica, and that's the boxing one. And I actually had to look into boxing and all, as well as this trans character who's the main character. So there's a real range here, and it's humbling also to go back and read something you wrote 20 years ago.
Oh yeah.
But I really hope that it offers something to readers who are both new to erotica and also readers who've been reading erotica but just want some variety and want to, find something new in there.
Okay. All right. So a little something for everyone is what I'm hearing. And did you write all of the stories, or did other writers contribute?
In this book, they're all my stories, and this is the first time I've put together a book of just my stories. I've edited a lot of other anthologies. I've edited over 70 of them. Some have themes like spanking, and some don't have a theme, or the theme is pretty open-ended, like female orgasm. But these are all written by me. And so, it's interesting because when I'm editing other people's stories to put together an anthology, in some ways there's I mean, these are as varied as I could make them, but I'm still just one person. So maybe there's things that I haven't even noticed that they share. Like I have a friend of mine who said, "Oh, you always have a tell. You always have something of yours that's in your stories." It might not be in every single one, but because I have written a few under pseudonyms, and she was like, "I can tell." uh, when I'm editing other people's stories and I'm putting together an anthology, I think sometimes I mean, what I love about that process is that they'll write something that I could sit at my computer for, every day for months and never come up with because my brain just doesn't go in that direction.
Hmm.
Uh, and so yeah, so it's been fun to look back at these stories because some of them I mean I'm 48, so I wrote some of these in my 20s, some in my 30s. I wrote two new ones for this book. So it's interesting to look at the different aspects of sexuality that I've been interested in and what inspired them. There's some very personal pieces and some that are, I would say, more fun and sort of maybe silly. Like there's one called Doing the Dishes, which is literally about a woman with a dishwashing fetish. And that one was inspired by my life in the sense that I really do enjoy washing dishes. Sometimes I've found it erotic, not every time, but I do enjoy the process. So that inspired that story. And yeah,
Okay.
so
Okay. I when you said doing the dishes, what immediately came to mind when I was really young, I worked in a video store, um, and there was a movie called Debbie Does Dishes, uh,
I love that.
and it was a pornography movie. I don't know if it would still be considered that, but back then it was. But that's what immediately came to mind. So, um,
Well, it's something that I also teach erotica writing classes, and something I really try to emphasize is that you can make anything erotic if you want to, if you look at it through that lens. I mean, both silly things like that, but also, I've published stories where people are going to a funeral and are, the characters are having sex beforehand or afterwards. Now, that's kind of story is not going to have the same tone as a dishwashing fetish story.
mhm.
But I think the idea that we only have desire when our life is going perfectly is not true. I mean, the desire might be expressed differently and it might come from a different emotional place. But I think, sex can be something that people cling to in challenging times, and also something we do to celebrate good times,
Mhm.
and I think that is definitely reflected in this book. There's a story about a widow who goes on to, enjoy aspects of sex that she hadn't before. And there's a story about a breakup that was inspired by a breakup of mine that is definitely, I think, one of the most soulful stories I've ever written, but definitely a challenging one. And, people have told me it made them cry, which is not something you usually hear about erotica. And
No,
I almost feel like I shouldn't have said that because people are going to be like, I don't want to read a book of erotica that's going to make me cry. So there's only one
it's just
story,
one story.
just that one. And I put it in the middle just because I wanted to juxtapose it with, other ones. Like the one before that is about a woman enjoying bondage at a nightclub, and like her wrists are tied under the table at this popular crowded club, and only her and her partner know that. And that's a kind of, I don't know if it's a trope, but that's a theme that I really enjoy, where someone is enjoying something that is sexual to them, but that, is a little bit hidden, or there's a sort of, there's something about it that maybe they know that other people around them don't know. So there's a heightened sense of playfulness.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of playfulness and humor, which is funny because if I were to set out to write something funny, I don't know if I could do it, but I think that humor does come across in, almost on its own, like without my doing it necessarily or without my trying to do it.
And Rachel, when is Lap Dance out? It is out already, right?
It is out, yeah. It came out in February.
In
So
February. And where would people obtain your book?
you can get it at any bookstore, online. It's out as an ebook and in print, and it will be out as an audiobook, but it's not. It hasn't been that the audiobook isn't out yet, but it will be for those of you who enjoy audio erotica.
And who's going to read it?
I do not know.
Okay.
I I I do listen to the narrators, but I don't, to make sure that I like their voice, but I'm not sure yet who's going to
Okay.
be.
All right. Well, that's cool. Um, you
It's
have,
funny.
go
A lot
ahead.
of people really love audio erotica, and just audiobooks in general, which I think has really opened up erotica to people who either just prefer audio or like don't want a physical copy of erotica in their house, or they can't, like, for privacy reasons, they want to just have it be their own thing that maybe nobody else knows about. So I think it's wonderful that so much of erotica is now available in various formats, for people who want that. And I think a good narrator can really make a story come alive in a totally different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That's so important to get the right narrator for any story, really. Um,
Yeah.
so, how did erotica become your niche?
It that happened, I would say, almost by accident. I was in law school a long time ago, when I was, well, I'm 48, when I was in my early 20s. Um, and at the time, I had just started reading erotica a few years before, and I'd never thought that I would write it. I'd always been a writer, but of nonfiction, and I never thought that I would write fiction. But I was reading a lot of short erotic stories, and there was, can I curse?
Oh, absolutely.
I want to make sure, because
Curse away.
I saw a call for submissions for a book of celebrity erotic short stories. And the book was called Starfucker, which was the name of a zine that the editor, Shar Rednauer, had published. And this was in 1998 that I saw this. And so Monica Lewinsky's story was big in the news. And I thought, okay, I'm going to write a story about Monica. And I wrote a story called Monica and Me, which was my first erotica story and the first one that got published. It was published in Starfucker. And it was just so exciting to see something that, I wrote on my computer in a book.
Mm-hmm.
I had never done that before. And it was really thrilling. And I remember I hadn't gotten my author copies in the mail yet, but I saw it in a bookstore and I was like, oh my goodness. It was just really thrilling. And I was like, I'm going to keep writing more stories. So the first stories I wrote were either like that one, like a fantasy that I had, or something that happened to me or inspired by something that happened to me. And then later on, I branched out. But really, it all started from that one story. I never intended this to be my career, but law school didn't wind up working out for me. And I went on to have a series of not memorable jobs, but through writing erotica and writing nonfiction about sex, and then later deciding, okay, I want to spread the word about this and help other people who want to write erotica. I started teaching classes on it, and it just slowly kind of, I don't know if took over my life is correct, but it became the main part of my career. And I don't know if I would have ever set out, like, I feel like if I had set out to do it, it probably wouldn't have gone the way it did, but
Mm-hmm.
it came kind of gradually. Like, I started writing the stories, And then after a few years, someone asked me to co-edit an anthology, and then someone asked me to edit my own. And so this year, 2024, marks 25 years since that first story was published. And that was,
Congratulations.
thank you. And so that was why I wanted to put together Lap Dance Lust, because some of the stories, I mean, I remembered them once I was digging through my archives, but there were so many that I was like, oh yeah, that one and that one. And there were others that I didn't get to include, but that it was fun to just recall writing and revisit. So this is kind of my just culmination of what I've been doing since that first story.
Wow.
And I think it's safe to say writing erotica has changed my life, both my professional life and also my personal life. I met my ex-girlfriend who sadly passed away last year, but I met her via that Monica and Me story because she had read it and she also had a crush on Monica and we bonded over that. And so, like I feel so grateful that for whatever reason, like my interest veered in this direction.
Okay. Um, that is, that's a lifelong dedication, really. And I just want to ask, where does one teach how to write erotica? Is that
I've taught in person at a lot of sex toy stores and other venues like educational, a few colleges and sort of community centers. And then the last few years, I've been doing most of that teaching online. I'm sort of on a break from that right now, but it's been really interesting to, I think the biggest thing that's been interesting about it to me is that while yes, I teach specific ways to add sexual tension to your stories and to develop the erotic momentum. I think the biggest thing that I do though is not give any specific advice, but really give people permission to unlock the things that they want to write about or have buried somewhere inside of them. I think even now, as much now, maybe even more now as 20 years ago, there's still a lot of shame put on people or either put on them from external forces or that they've grown up being told they should feel about sex, that when they go to write erotica, I think for a lot of people that stops them from even getting started because they're thinking, well, what if this person sees it and knows I wrote that? Or what if I write this? Like, what does that say about me? And like, where does this idea come from? And, like I think it largely reflects our cultural experiences around sex. And, that's different for every person, but I think there's just still so much stigma around it that I think a lot of what I do as a teacher is really just encourage people to go wherever their minds take them and know that, first of all, you can write something and not necessarily publish it, or you could publish it under a pseudonym, but the process of writing can unlock powerful things for you in your mind, in your heart, and it can help you discover things about yourself that you might not have known about. And certainly for me, that's been the case, which is not to say that everything I write about is a personal fantasy. Sometimes I challenge myself to try to write about something that's not like that's the opposite, that I don't actually find erotic, but can I write about someone with a fetish that isn't like the dishwashing one that I sort of share, but is something different? So like boxing story.
So you have to do a little research on those.
Yeah, and there can be really fun research you can do. Like I've researched fire eating. I once was trying to write, I actually never finished this story, but I wanted to write about firefighters because there was an anthology about firefighters. And I wanted to write about someone setting fires, like a woman setting fires in her house so that the firemen could come. rescue her, but I had to make it so that she wasn't burning her entire house down because that would be too tragic. Like, and take like that
Yeah.
wouldn't
It would be
put
a
my.
one-off.
So I wanted like a fire in the microwave or
Yeah.
like a little fire that maybe she couldn't put out totally herself, but like so I had to research like what are those kinds of fires and or sometimes I've just researched like interesting beds or interesting sex toys, like just something out of the ordinary.
Hmm.
And I think that research can be really fun and it can lead you all kinds of places. I mean, it could just be a photo that strikes your fancy and you are inspired by that photo. Or I've been inspired sometimes just by a phrase, like on a poster.
I'll bet
I
you
think
have an interesting Google search history.
definitely. And I think, sometimes a phrase can be something that means something in one context, like necessary roughness, which I think is a football or it's a sports term. I know that.
Hmm.
But when I saw that, because I believe it was a TV show, I saw that on a poster and I was like, that is a perfect title for an erotica story. And so I didn't even need to know what the real meaning was. I just borrowed the phrase for my own purposes. So
Okay.
I think that kind of stuff can be really fun. And as much as I've enjoyed writing about things that have happened to me, I've really enjoyed making up characters who are different from me. And sometimes they share something in common with me. Like sometimes they share a fetish or an experience, but I'm transposing it onto them.
Hmm.
Um, Sometimes it's just something that I think would be cool if it existed, like
Hmm.
so there's a story in Lap Dance Lust called I'll Have What She's Having, and it's about a woman who is hired to sit in the window of a restaurant and eat in a really sensual, seductive way to try to get people to come into the restaurant.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was so fun. And it was inspired by just thinking about like, people have different ways of eating. Like some are very utilitarian and just like, gobbling everything up, and some are very elegant and sensual, and your eye is drawn to them.
Hmm.
And I thought that was really fun. And I love taking a setting like a restaurant where we've probably all been to a restaurant and just transforming it into the background for an erotic story.
Yeah, that's really clever. I like that. That's a great idea for a story. Have you had any reviews of your of lap dance, and how has it been received?
I haven't seen as many reviews of this one come out yet. I've seen a few and it's been interesting. It's always interesting to me to see which stories are people's
Uh
favorites.
huh.
Um, so and so it's been nice to see people appreciating both the more humorous ones and like I said, the more intense emotional ones. And I sort of I do read what people say about my books, but I also try to take it with a grain of salt because once you finish writing it, you're sort of giving it to the world and they can like it or not like it. And in my mind, I try to move on to the next thing just so
Hmm.
that I'm not getting caught up in it because it's already published. Like I can't change it. And I think that's sort of the blessing and curse of all writing is that you could always be tinkering with it, if you wanted to, and that at some point you have to say you're done or done for now and let it go. So that was an interesting exercise with going back to these older stories. Like, should I, try to finesse them or just take them exactly as they were originally published?
Yeah.
Um, so
Okay.
yeah, I think, I think something else that was interesting is that when I was first starting out, in some ways, I think writing my own stories was easier because I hadn't done it before. So it was all new to me. So I was very enthusiastic. And I'm
Yeah.
still enthusiastic, but I actually did find that writing the new stories for this book was actually a little bit challenging,
Uh,
more than I would have thought. And I think because I was like second guessing myself
yeah.
more than I did at the beginning for sure.
If you were to write in a different genre, what would be that genre? What have you considered, if you've considered anything else?
I mean, I really have not considered any other fiction genres. I would love if I could write a mystery because I read a lot of mysteries, but every time I've thought about it, I don't think I have that kind of brain. Like I don't even try to solve. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if I have an idea while I'm reading a mystery, I will entertain it, but I'm not that person who's trying to figure out who did it. I want to find out as I'm reading.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've really never thought about trying to write other fiction. I do write nonfiction. I write essays and journalism. Um, and I like the balance of those. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to say I'll never do it
Mm-hmm.
because maybe I will write. It would probably be short stories, just non-erotic ones.
You could write an erotic mystery.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, part of me thinks, oh, it'd be cool to be able to write mysteries, but I wonder then would I enjoy them less? Would I enjoy
Ah.
reading them less? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But if I ever have an idea, like I will definitely go for it. And I think one of the really nice things about erotica specifically, because that's the only, you know, fictional genre that I can speak to, is that it's been so welcoming to me, but it's also been really welcoming to tons of other writers who similar to me, like didn't have background in it or didn't don't have a writing degree or you know, and I think that you can jump into erotica without any of those things as long as you have, you know, creative ideas and empathy and you know, you work on writing things that people are going to want to read and you know you read in the genre to know what kinds of stuff people like, but I think even now the landscape for it has changed, especially in traditional publishing, but there are so many more opportunities with self-publishing now than there were back when I started in 1999. So I think, you know, there's always new people coming into erotica who have something to say, whether it's based on their own life or their fantasies or just ideas. And I think that's great. Like I hope to see more people jumping in and, you know,
Mm-hmm.
putting their fantasies down because there is a avid audience for all kinds of erotica. I mean, some things that you might think were very niche or that some people might think were very niche, like, you know, alien erotica or
Mm-hmm.
like, um, I mean, they're huge dinosaur erotica. Like some of these are
Really?
huge subgenres. Yeah.
Wow,
And
I
like
didn't know that.
there's like readers who can't get enough, and there are readers who might only read those kinds of stories.
Okay. I
So
did not know that. I didn't know like there were like sub genres
if
like that.
you look up dinosaur erotica or alien erotica and like the aliens, there's so many, there's different types of aliens, and I don't read that myself, and I don't really read science fiction myself. I've tried,
Mm-hmm.
but my brain, I'm just too literal. So it's not something that I know everything about, but it's really thriving online. And I think that's great. Like, I think it's great that now, because of the internet, you know, any fetish that someone has or interest, they can find.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well,
I mean,
you
I hope people like my stories, but I also know that, you know, if they don't, there's other stuff out there for them.
you wrote a book. It's called Best Women's Erotica Series.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a
yeah.
series that comes out every December, and it's a collection of short stories from writers all over the world,
Ah, okay.
women and non-binary writers. That has been really fun and exciting to get to edit because I've worked with, I don't know how many countries, but we've published authors from lots of different countries
Really?
all across the United States too. And it's really cool just to both to see what people are writing, and I feel like there is this community of erotica authors who are all really supportive of each other. I've done readings for the series in LA and Chicago and DC and New York. And it's been really fun to just get to hear people reading their stories and get to hear what inspired them. A lot of the stories have a very, I don't know if feminist is the right word. Some of them definitely have a feminist bent. Like there's a story that a writer named Sabrina Soul wrote called At the Pleasure of the President, and it's about a Latina president of the United States and her erotic escapades. That one I thought was a really fun one. Yeah, so
How many?
that's been
I'm sorry. How
cool.
many books are in that series?
There are 9,
Wow.
and then right now, and then the 10th is coming out this December.
Wow. So that you've been doing that for 10 years.
Yeah.
That's
I've been,
awesome.
and I have other anthologies I've edited that are now some people like this, some people don't, but there's 69 stories, and yes, that's deliberate, and they're all really short. They're all 1,200 words or less, so you can read like one in 5 minutes. And those, I think, I love those because they're so fun. And you have to be very economical with your words when you only have 1,200 words.
That's hard.
Oh,
Yeah.
and not everyone can do it. Like a lot of writers were like, I would love to write for this, but I literally can't. Like I'm just getting started and I'm already past 1,200 words.
Yeah.
And again, like going to what I was saying before about different people having different tastes, like some people like that variety and want to kind of just quickly get in the mood and, jump right in, and they don't want necessarily 80,000 word novel of smut. But
Mm-hmm.
some people do. Like some people want the longer the better.
Mm-hmm.
So I totally understand both of those things. Like, and I read novels, I read short stories. Like I get the desire for both of those things. But I've
Mm-hmm.
learned so much from editing the Best Women's Erotica of the Year series and my other anthologies about like different kinds of storytelling and different ways of approaching a theme. I've edited several books about spanking, and you might think, oh, well, like after one or two books, like what else is there to say? But there's always something new to say.
Okay.
And I think that especially with sex and erotica, like there is always a new way. There may not be a new sex act, although there might, but there's always a new approach someone can take.
Okay.
And I think that's what has kept me doing this for so long,
Mm-hmm.
that there's always something new to discover.
Okay. Well,
Something I had.
you recently wrote a book too called, it was like a how-to book.
Yes, I wrote a book called How to Write Erotica because I'd been teaching these classes for so long. And, I know that not everyone can attend them. And, I wanted to kind of collect the writing tips that I've been using in those classes and give some examples of how people can get started and how, what some of the common questions I get are like, okay, so I made this scenario, but like, how do I write the sex scene? And,
Mm-hmm.
What do I do here and there? So I was really happy to be able to gather that information because I want anyone who is interested in erotica to try it, and I don't think it's for everyone. Like I don't think everyone should write erotica at some point in their lives if they're a fiction writer.
Mm-hmm.
Although definitely I think it could benefit people who write in other genres if they want to make their sex scenes sexier.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so and that was also fun to revisit the inspiration for some of my writing, but also highlight authors whose work I think does a really good job of touching on either a type of sex or an approach to erotica that is different, from mine.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also just a lot of writing prompts in there because I think like some people will seek out writing erotica because something happened to them and they're like dying to write about it, or they just, people have said to them, oh, you should write erotica, but they're like, oh, I don't know where to start. So, uh, and over the years, like I've taught some of these prompts in multiple times, and they're really fun. Like one of
Mm-hmm.
them is, I think I've expanded it to like pick any furniture that's not a bed, but I used to just say, okay, you have to write about a chair. And I think some people would think, oh, a chair, like that's either boring or like, what am I going to do with a chair? But there's so many, first of all, types of chairs. There's like a bar stool or like a lounge chair or just a regular table chair. Like someone could be tied to a chair. Someone could be, uh, I don't know, like standing on a chair, or
Mm-hmm.
there are special chairs where there's like a hole in the bottom. So someone could be like receiving oral sex from
Mm-hmm.
someone underneath the chair.
So you
And
really give uh, people permission in your how to book to use their imagination and just run with it.
yeah, and I think that's a large part of thinking in an erotic mindset is looking around you, and maybe that's your kitchen or your neighborhood or your car or whatever it is, and thinking, okay, like how could I spice this up? And it's not that it always has to be something that would happen or is likely to happen, but I love to give an assignment of like writing about something that in real life really frustrates you, like being stuck in traffic or having to wait online at the DMV or the post office, and like thinking about, okay, so you can't necessarily fix that situation, but could you make an erotic story out of that?
Mm-hmm. And
And I think like there's all kinds of things then once you start thinking in that direction, ways
yeah.
that could.
And Rachel, are you working on anything currently?
I have two more anthologies I have coming out this year. I have
Wow.
The Big Book of Quickies, which is another one of those 69 story, very short stories. They're not all about necessarily quickie sex, but they're short, stories that you can read in just a few minutes.
And
And
that
then I
was
have
called Big Little Quickies?
The Big Book of
Oh,
Quickies.
the Big Book of Quickies.
And that's
Okay.
coming out in July, I think. And then in December, I have Best Women's Erotica of the Year, Volume 10. And then the other things I'm working on are all nonfiction. I have a few essays in the works, and I'm hoping to edit a nonfiction book about our emotional connection to our belongings, because that's another thing I've written about totally outside of the erotica world is hoarding. I've been a hoarder, and I definitely am someone like if you ever ask me, do you want to keep this? I'll almost always say yes without even looking. Like I always want to keep everything.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Uh,
And
do you
at
have
first
a background in psychology? Is that
I don't,
okay?
but I mean, hoarding is definitely something that I have a lot of both personal experience with, and I've talked to a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
about their own place on that spectrum from like minimalist to hoarding. And at first, I wanted to do a book of just essays about hoarding,
Mm-hmm.
but the more I was thinking about it, the more I realized that I wanted to really look at it as a spectrum. And also, just I'm fascinated by people who are collectors of whatever. Like people collect vintage cereal boxes, people collect, you know, certain toys, and the people who collect like whatever kind of collection someone has, if they're like a really avid collector, they're obsessed.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always interested in someone who has an obsession, like whatever that is. I mean, not whatever, but I'm interested in fans. Like in my journalism career, I went to a conference, not a conference, but like a event celebrating the movie Jaws.
Yeah.
And I mean, the people I met there, they had seen it like 400 times.
Oh
They had
yeah.
tattoos. They'd gotten married or engaged at like the Jaws, rides. Like they literally knew more about the movie than some people who were in it because, or not knew more, but like they'd watched it so many times
Mm-hmm.
that they could recall details that the people who had been in it decades ago, it's not like they sit around and watch it every day. So
Yeah. It becomes like a cult classic.
And so I love stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that that project moves forward because I'm just curious about people's stories. Like some, I've talked to people whose parents were hoarders. I'm also interested in people who are minimalists and keep as little as possible,
Mm-hmm.
which to me that's really interesting because that's so different from my approach.
Mm-hmm. No emotional connection or little emotional connection to things, I would think.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm not totally sure. I mean, I'd have to talk to more minimalists. I think though, if you are a minimalist, like the things you do keep are probably very important to you.
Sure.
Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm like, whenever I hear about someone who collects something really quirky, like I'm just always fascinated by how they, how they know which things which, how they acquire their collection and how they keep it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I could talk to people about that all the time. I'm
Do you,
fascinated by that.
do you know who Lara Spencer is? Um, she's
Um,
a journalist. She's on Good Morning America. Uh,
okay.
and she has a show called Everything But the House, and you might enjoy that because it's people who have collections of anything and everything you can imagine, and multitudes of collections, are ready to unload them, and
Oh,
so
I will definitely.
yeah, she comes in and with these appraisers, and they go through everything. It's really I find it fascinating. I
I
think
will
there's two
definitely.
seasons of it. Yeah.
And it's funny because, I mean, sometimes you can either reacquire something that you used to have or, come close to doing that. And there's definitely objects, like individual items that I wish I hadn't gotten rid of. In like I had two baby blankets from when I was born that wound up getting thrown out. They were very tattered and
Oh
old,
yeah, yeah.
and they got thrown out. But I wish I had them just because they were like such a part of my life.
Sure.
Um,
I
but,
just gave my nephew his baby blanket I had. So
but then there's other things like page 6 is the gossip page in the New York Post, and my ex and I we had these T-shirts that they were a knockoff. I forget who made them originally, but they said page 666, but they had the same logo, and we wore them when we dated in 2003. Is that right? 2003, yes. So anyway, last year we were talking about it and we were like, oh, I wonder if we could get those t-shirts again because neither of us had ours. So we bought them again and it
hmm
was really fun. Oh, someone was selling them, like I think on Redbubble. And it was really fun. Like it wasn't the exact thing that we had before, but it pretty much looked like it. And it was kind of cool. And I think sometimes people can find either like a replica of the thing that they've been looking for or something close to it.
hmm
And so I am interested in collectors, whether they have like everything, whether they're exhaustive collectors or they're only searching for like that one thing that was made in 1954 or whatever it
yeah,
is.
right. So Rachel, this is something I read about you. This is interesting. So um, I read that you are seen as an expert regarding cupcakes, books, hoarding, sex, and dating. Now, I think this is just a, a nice array of topics, but are these connected in any way? And how did you become an expertise? Um,
I well, I mean, sex and dating, I do think are related. The others are different. I mean, they're related in the sense that at different times in my life, I've been really immersed in them. So I'll try to go through all of them. I mean, books is probably the thing I've been the most interested in my whole life. I was as a kid, I read Trixie Belden and Sweet Valley High, and I did have the collection. Like I had my books in a specific spot, and every time the new one came out, I had to read it and then put it right next to all the others.
mm-hmm.
I'm not as obsessive about how I store my books now. They're much more they're not as coordinated.
You probably have
But
too many to keep them that
I
coordinated.
do many, many books. And even though I've gotten rid of lots of books over the years, I still have tons of books.
Yeah.
And I think you can never have too many books. And if I had infinite space, I would never have gotten rid of the books that I did. But so I do write a lot about books and publishing and libraries. I wrote a piece for the New York Times about people giving books as wedding favors. And that is the kind of story that I love to dive into. I wrote one for the Washington Post book world about books with long subtitles. I love really nerdy publishing stories. And I also love talking to authors. So I do pay attention to what's coming out in the book world, which is it's fun, but it can be overwhelming because I'm like, oh, I want to read that and that and that and that and that. And then like, you don't have enough hours in the day.
No, never. There's too many books.
Cupcakes for a long time, for over a decade, I was part of a cupcake blog called Cupcakes Take the Cake. And that also started like my erotica interest on a whim. It was a time when, a lot of people were blogging about all kinds of things. And some bakeries had just opened in New York where I lived. And I thought, okay, I'm into cupcakes. I'm going to start a blog about them. And at the beginning, it was just photos of cupcakes and little reviews, but it really grew to where like I once went to a cupcake bakery in St. Louis. I was visiting family and I had a purse with cupcakes on it. And these women were there and they recognized me from the blog.
How about
and it
that?
was so funny. And I ate cupcakes. I think I wound up going to 26 states and eating them. And I've eaten cupcakes in 4 different countries. So for a while, like basically, every day people would send us photos of their cupcakes or, news about bakeries. And it was really cool because if I met someone and they were like, I'm from, Seattle or I'm from wherever, I could say, oh, there's a bakery there. Like, have you been to this bakery? So for a while I'm not saying I knew every bakery, but I stored in my head like the information about probably hundreds of bakeries and different kinds of cakes. And everywhere I would go, I would try to sample as many cupcakes as I could. And sometimes like I'd go visit people and bakeries would bring cupcakes to my friends or family's houses.
Cool.
It was really exciting and it was fun. And it was also as much as it was about food, it was also a little bit of a window into pop culture and the news, because whenever something really momentous would happen in the news, like if someone died, I think when Steve Jobs died, people made cupcakes of that. Or like, I haven't looked it up because I don't run that blog anymore, but I'm sure there's Caitlin Clark cupcakes right now.
Yeah.
I would be shocked if there wasn't.
Have you ever seen a cupcake ATM?
I have seen those. I don't think I've actually gotten one from them, but I have had Sprinkles cupcakes, and I think it's so cool. I saw one in an airport recently, and I was like, that's so exciting.
Yeah,
I would
fun.
say the coolest thing I ever saw in the cupcake world was it was President's Day. I forget what year, but during when Obama was president, and this woman, Zilly Rosen, she's a baker. She made this exhibit of cupcakes of Obama and Lincoln's faces at I think it was the Smithsonian Gallery of Art, like on the floor. I mean, it was thousands of cupcakes. It was amazing. And it obviously also involved a lot of math and, she didn't just like freehand. It was like one of those dot paintings where like, or that are made up of all different photos. So like she had cupcakes in all these different shades and that's it was amazing. I mean, that was just so cool to see it because you could go, I think we were like standing above and we're watching her below. It was just very cool to see people making art out of this edible dessert.
Yeah. That's exactly what I thought of was the dot matrix that,
it
make
was
up
exactly like that, but with cupcakes. And then people, just the individual cupcakes, I mean, people would make gorgeous, artwork on a cupcake sometimes that looks so beautiful, like you didn't want to eat it because you're going to destroy their hard work. So that was really fun. And again, like was not something I intended to be a job, but it wound up being a side hustle. For a while,
Cool.
my friends and I were making a decent amount of money from it, from through ads and stuff. But
That's cool. Is your blog still available online?
yeah, it's cupcakestakethecake.blogspot.com. And I think another really cool aspect of that was meeting people who were running bakeries, but a lot of them, most of them were women. A lot of them, it was their first business or their first retail business that they, owned. And they were just really passionate about what they did and trying to differentiate it and offer something that makes people happy. And I think for me, it was a little bit of a way to, not that I don't love erotica, but it was the sort of innocent side of my life, whereas the erotica side was the racier side.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't want my entire career to be all about sex because
Mm-hmm.
I think that can be it can be challenging sometimes. It's just not so much for me, but people's perception.
Mm-hmm.
I think that because I've written sex columns and I've written about my own life and I've written erotica, I think there are a lot of people who then think that there's no boundaries about what they can tell me. So like, I'd be out and about and
Oh
people would
boy.
talking to me about their sex life. And like sometimes that's appropriate. Like if you're having an intimate conversation and if you click with someone and you become friendly with them or whatever. But like a lot of times it was not appropriate. So
Yeah.
was a way, I think, for me to have something that was just wholesome and sort of just the opposite of that. And also just to meet people all over the world. Like I went to Dubai on vacation and I met cupcake bakers and
Yeah.
like I went to Hawaii and also like I organized a cupcake meetup and it was just a really fun way to experience the world. And there's still tons of cupcake bakeries out there. I'm not as on the cutting edge of them, and I think I a little bit burned out on eating so many cupcakes because it's so rich. Like I couldn't, and also I was younger. Like I just think that the sugar overload, I couldn't do that now. I
Yeah, I
couldn't
can
eat
imagine.
I didn't eat them every single day, but I definitely ate them multiple times a week. And like, I just don't think my body could process that right now.
Yeah. So,
But I'm so glad I did it. Like, it was such a fun time.
oh, it sounds it, and it sounds like you met a lot of people through cupcakes.
Yeah. And I got to I mean, I think I learned things about business just from observing how, you would go to one city like Washington, D.C. or wherever, or where I lived in New York, and there would be sometimes dozens or if a smaller city, like fewer, but like there'd be different people making the same dessert, but approaching it in a totally different way.
Oh yeah,
Uh, Similar to writing, like they were each putting their own spin on it.
yeah,
And
that's
I think
true.
there is just as like readers don't just read one thing. I mean, like I think readers, an avid reader will read lots of different writers in the genre they like. And I think if someone likes cupcakes or desserts or whatever, they'll try different places. And yeah, they might have a favorite, but I think there is room for all sorts of different approaches to whatever it is, whether it's food or writing. So yeah, so that's how that came about.
Well, you certainly have an eclectic background, Rachel, and I'm sure that lends to ideas for your stories, and that is
Yeah, I
wonderful.
mean, I'm always looking. I don't know if I'm always looking around, but I think like I am just built to be a writer. I've written in some form since I was a kid, and I got my start writing letters to the editor when I was a teenager about all kinds of topics. So when something momentous happens to me in my personal life, or I have a strong opinion about something, it's still my first instinct to write about it. And I used to blog. I mean, I used to do it more frequently. I don't do that as much and I don't post as much on social media as I used to, but I do still write, and it's still the primary way I process things
Hmm.
is to write. And sometimes that becomes an erotica story, sometimes it becomes an essay, and it really depends what it is.
So, speaking of social media, where can our listeners, you know, track you down and follow you?
You can find me on Instagram, Rachel Kramer Bussel. I am on Twitter, X Raquelita, Raquelita. I am not as active there right now, but I might be at some point. Those are probably the main places. And then I have a newsletter, rachelkramerbussel.substack.com. Sometimes I'm more chatty there. Like sometimes it's like every week, sometimes it's every other month. It really depends, but I'm trying to get back to that because I'm trying to, I think maybe it's ironic because I've written like a how to write erotica book, and I've taught classes about writing, and I'm confident about writing, but then some days I like will write something and then I'm like, this is terrible. I can never publish this. And then I get like cold feet or whatever. I don't, it's not really writer's block. It's more like this fear. And I feel like I shouldn't have that. Like I should be past the point where you have that, but maybe some people always have that.
Yeah, I
I don't
think
know.
so. Yeah,
I
I
have
think,
to like bribe myself sometimes or trick myself and say, okay, just like write for 20 minutes and then, you can go read a book.
yeah. Oh, that's great. So, I think that is about all the time we have for today. And Rachel, do you have
Thank
any
you so
parting
much.
words for our listeners?
Just that I think if you're curious about erotica, whether as a reader or listener or writer or all of those, like see what's out there. There's tons of erotica podcasts, there's ebooks, there's print books, like and they're in so many different forms and they tackle so many different types of sexuality that there's something out there for everyone. And I think the other thing I'd say on the erotica front is that you might not think you're into a certain thing, but if you wind up reading something about it and it turns you on, like that's fine. It doesn't necessarily mean like you want to do it in real life. Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with doing things in real life, but I think that people can even as readers can feel uncomfortable, like, oh, like, does this mean I want to cheat on my partner, or does this mean that I'm, kinky or this or that? I mean, it might mean like erotica can unlock sexual awakenings, but it could also just mean someone is a good writer and they've captured your attention and, given you something to, get off on, and that's fine too.
All right. Well, thank you, Rachel Kramer Bussel, for joining Les Talk About Books, baby. I'm Anita Kelly, and until next time, may your journey be lighthearted, peace be plenty, and be safe, folks.